I could get back to this one, but I'll save that for another point. We have Boetti's Nothing to Hide, Nothing to See, which is a wonderful sort of play on the Renaissance idea of the window. And the interesting thing is you can see through it, but at the same time there's this endless change or reflections that you find on the surface of glass, which is being played on by Boetti, and which is partly inspired by, well, I won't go too far ahead, but which then ties into the theme of illusion and reality, which obviously we all know is quite a popular theme. Everything from Calderon's Life is a Dream to Ben Jonson's The New Inn, which is one of my favorite sort of Baroque tales. And Michelangelo Pistoletto had a theater performance group called The Zoo, and they did this piece in Amalfi in 1968, which the interesting characteristic is how they draw in audience participation. And people are allowed to float into this performance and float out of the performance, and you reach a moment where you're not sure who's performer, who's audience, and that it's that beautiful, and they'll come at it, you have this poor individual in the middle snapshot who was actually loading this truck with with these bales of weight, but it became part of the performance because the dancer started moving around, and again, it's this wonderful sort of blurring of those lines, which is typical of some of the Baroque plays, and which has, this was part of my interest as well, reading, I don't know if you've ever, Arthur Schnitzler's The Green Cockatoo, as a sort of Viennese rewriting of that idea of illusion and reality, and very much of a sort of Baroque revival. But that's what the Pistoletto piece is. Also dealt with identity, because Pistoletto had another performance where everybody wore a mask, which was a photograph of Pistoletto's face. So you had all these Pistolettos walking around, and who's the real Pistoletto, who's not the real Pistoletto, and obviously the point was, there's really no point to trying to figure this out. And Pistoletto, and the idea of change and transformation, he became famous for his mirror works, his mirrored surfaces, I should say, because he doesn't use mirrors, he only uses mirrors later on, but these that have these applied figures, painted figures on top of these highly varnished surfaces, obviously are tied into this idea of metamorphosis and constant change. And he always loves to describe these works. He said, my mirror works are the best example of a timeless work because they're always changing and they're always sort of relevant in terms of this contemporary moment. And they're you have to be very careful because what you're looking at is, this was installed in an exhibition that had 3 monographic monochromes by Alexander Rodchenko, and in the background you can actually see an Andy Warhol that were Kennedy's party Jack Onassis. And so the reflections, and it's always, these things are always difficult to photograph, obviously, because you have to sort of get to the angle of these works. And the other thing is always remind me, and I don't think Pistoletto was really necessarily thinking of this, but he never used, well, he uses mirrors, but always plain mirrors if he's just going to use it for a reflective element without adding something on it. The metal surfaces, there's always this distortion to it, so that the illusion's always undermined, in a sense, and he does like this fact of this slight warped effect of these highly polished surfaces, because they are meant to remind you that you're looking at a sort of illusionistic reflection in this, but I haven't been able to pin him down in terms of how intentional that was. I suspect it is, but art is always a little secret for other devices. But the mirror obviously makes reference, and I use Les Meninas as the most famous example of having the king and queen reflected in the background there, but it also introduces this element of the role of the viewer, which is very important in the Povera works. Their works are very much meant to draw the viewer in and engage in sort of conversation with the viewer, which the Baroque device of all these individuals looking out at us and literally making us part of the work is certainly an element that's at play there. In fact, Paolini takes this nice Renaissance portrait by Lorenzo Lotto and, in a sense, makes it Baroque by retitling it, because the original Lorenzo Lotto, which you see on the left, which is in the Uffizi, Head of a Young Man in 1505, is then photocopied by Paolini and then retitled as Young Man Looking at Lorenzo Lotto. But it redefines that relationship. It's such a brilliant, that's the thing that I always liked about the Povera works. It's very simple, but they're ingenious when they're really successful in what they're attempting to do. And Paolini was very much in terms of this reversal and re-identification with the viewer in some of these works, and like I said, transforms Lotto from a Renaissance artist to a Baroque artist in a sort of nice, simple, and also modern gesture, using the photocopier is a rather interesting sort of device in this that was quite conscious in that sense. And the creating the sense of self-awareness is an important work in the Povera artist, and Luciano Fabro's theatrical staging his cube of mirrors. What you're looking at is obviously a cube of mirrors, but in it is a poet reading poetry. But that poet himself is surrounded by, or herself, could be anyone who wanted to perform, was surrounded by mirrors as well. So the artist, the creator, is only getting a reflection of themselves And then the audience who's hearing this is only getting a reflection of themselves. And so the audience becomes quite uncomfortable in the fact that they have no access to the work, in a way, or to the person that's associated with the work. They only have access to themselves and the other people in the audience. It's a very ingenious way to play with this element. And again, obviously, it's dealing with questions of self-identity in this. And that idea, coming from the Pistoletto and the notion of self-identity or recognition of the self, self-awareness, with Pistoletto, not surprising with his Man from Back, which is one of his mirrored surface pieces of 63, they originally started as self-portraits. This is called Gold Self-Portrait of 1962, which uses this gold leaf as a surface, and he noticed the reflective qualities of that surface and how he could sort of take advantage of that with the polished surfaces. And all of the self-portraits are faceless. In other words, they're still seeking out the individual identity, if that in fact exists. And so that was part of his argument, is that identity is fluid. And so, if you believe in reality as being something fluid, there's no way you can believe in a fixed identity, because that as well has to be fluid. So identity, the self, the other are important themes. This one I might be getting a little bit in terms of backward reading, because I may have been a little informed by the Buki-Glucksmann, my interest in Buki-Glucksmann's work, for example. But nonetheless, the theme of Narcissus is important for the Povera artists. This is a nice Caravaggio painting, just for the sake of providing you an image, but Narcissus is not a huge theme in Baroque painting in Europe. But it is a massive theme in terms of literature. And it's a very peculiar interpretation of the Narcissus image, because as Rousset and Genet pick up as well, it's not a question of identity and then falling in love with the self. It's a question of recognition of the self in the reflection, but at the same time a fear of the self, of not recognizing oneself. You recognize your physical appearance, but all of a sudden there's this notion of what Rousset calls la fuite. You want to escape it because it's strange to you. And so and that's exactly the type of Narcissus theme that the Arte Povera are dealing with, is this simple physical recognition, and then this running away from the fact that you just don't know who that person is. And again, a very popular theme in the Baroque literature, which the Arte Povera take up, and Algiero E. Boeri takes up that theme by splitting himself in two. So he actually adopts the "and" in his name to alienate himself from himself, and then has this wonderful photograph of himself holding hands with himself in a very ethereal realm, because the feet aren't on the ground, and they are two different moments, very distinct moments in time of Boeri and producing these twins. And then he does this later work, which I love. It's called The Probing the Mysteries of a Double Life of 1988. Taking a Newsweek cover that featured, examining twins, and then you notice the two Newsweek covers themselves are different, because the top story is deficit. I figured I'd throw this in because, the American crisis, you had a deficit dilemma at the top, and Tokyo stock market crash on the one on the right. So again, it's dealing again with this element of recognition and not recognizing, and the sort of fluidity of individuality, which is being drawn from, again, Baroque literature primarily with these artists. And then he does this wonderful series. He was invited, there were a number of articles that were dedicated to him, and he was invited to do a number of pieces for the art journal Parquet in 1990. And throughout the pieces, articles about him, he has these series of photographs of him face-to-face with friends, editor of the Parquet, a whole group of different individuals. So you can tell the one constant is Boeri in there, but his point obviously being that his identity is really formed in terms of social exchanges with all of these other people. So these are all portraits of Boeri, in a sense, as he's been transformed, modified, and again, this very fluid definition of individuality, which goes back to the mirror works, and I love this piece by Pistoletto called The Etruscan, and it really embodies nicely this idea of recognition and at the same time strangeness. Because you almost get the sense of the Etruscan, obviously he's in sort of military salute, right? But the way it's been staged is you get the sense that he's sort of touching himself for the first time, just recognizing himself for the first time. And yeah, it's a beautiful, very simple gesture. And try to tell my students that some of these things look kind of ordinary, but when you get at the point of what they're trying to drive at, it's remarkably rich. And in fact, Paolini goes with this element of identification to critique modernism, which in terms of the American formalism, the Italians were not oblivious to it. Where Michael Fried can state that the truly sort of modernist work doesn't need the viewer. The viewer is sort of accidental to the work; it can really survive on its own, and this is where he comes up with his mimesis piece of the artwork admiring itself in a way, but a very different sort of staging than what you find with the letter piece. Oh, there's some humorous bits in here.